The morning sun filtered through the large windows of Atlanta International Airport as Dr. Elena Washington made her way to Gate B-17. At 72 years old, she moved with the quiet confidence of someone who had spent decades commanding operating rooms and boardrooms alike. Her silver hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and she wore a simple navy pantsuit, comfortable enough for travel but professional enough for the meeting that awaited her in Chicago. Fellow travelers rushed past her, most too busy with their own journeys to notice the distinguished woman in their midst. Few would guess that this modest, elderly black woman was the chairperson of the Washington Foundation, one of the country's largest private philanthropic organizations with billions in assets. Eleanor checked the time on her watch, a gift from her late husband on their 40th anniversary. She had planned to arrive early, as was her habit throughout her career as one of the nation's top neurosurgeons. Better 30 minutes early than 30 seconds late, she would tell her medical students. That philosophy had served her well during the thousands of delicate brain surgeries she had performed over her career. As she approached the gate, she overheard snippets of conversation about flight delays and cancellations due to weather somewhere in the Midwest. She hoped her flight would depart on time. The meeting in Chicago couldn't be rescheduled. The board of Midwest Airlines was gathering specifically to finalize the partnership with her foundation. The $800 million grant had been in the works for nearly a year. It would transform how the airline hired, trained, and supported its employees. Elena had insisted on tying the funding to measurable improvements in customer satisfaction, especially among passengers from minority communities. Priority boarding for Flight 2417 to Chicago will begin momentarily, announced the gate agent. Elena took a seat near the boarding area and pulled out a folder of documents to review. The latest draft of the agreement included provisions for a completely revamped training program, a mentorship initiative for employees from underrepresented groups, and a community engagement plan that would provide free flights for medical patients who needed specialized treatment in other cities. When her boarding group was called, Eleanor tucked the folder into her handbag and joined the line. She handed her boarding pass to the agent, who barely glanced at her before scanning the document and waving her through. On the jetway, she mentally rehearsed key points for tomorrow's meeting. The airline's CEO had expressed enthusiasm about the partnership, but Eleanor knew that implementing such sweeping changes would require commitment from the entire leadership team. As she stepped onto the plane, the flight attendant at the door greeted passengers with varying degrees of warmth. Elena noticed how his smile tightened slightly when he saw her. She'd experienced these supple shifts in treatment throughout her life, too small to call out directly, but noticeable enough to create a familiar knot in her stomach. "Good morning," she said pleasantly. "Seat?" the attendant asked, skipping the customary greeting he'd offered to previous passengers. 14C, Eleanor replied, maintaining her smile. "Down that way," he said, already looking past her to the next passenger. Eleanor made her way down the aisle, noting similar patterns of behavior from the other flight attendants. One warmly helped a young white woman stow her bag, but merely pointed when an elderly Asian man asked for the same assistance. Reaching her row, Eleanor settled into the middle seat. She preferred window seats, but had booked late for this trip. On either side of her, passengers were already engrossed in books or phones. Elena removed her reading glasses from their case and took out the in-flight magazine, though her mind remained on tomorrow's meeting. The irony wasn't lost on her. Here she was, about to provide this very airline with $800 million to improve their service culture, while experiencing firsthand the problems her foundation aimed to address. "Sometimes you need to be part of the solution," her husband used to say. Little did Eleanor know that in the next hour, this routine flight would become the catalyst for a national conversation about dignity, respect, and the unexpected power of those society often overlooks. As the final passengers boarded and the aircraft doors closed, Dr. Eleanor Washington could not have imagined how this journey would change not just an airline, but an entire industry's approach to treating every customer with equal respect. The seatbelt sign dinged off 20 minutes after takeoff. Passengers began shifting in their seats, some reaching for books or laptops, while others reclined to catch a nap during the 2-hour flight to Chicago. Elena opened the novel she'd been saving for this trip, but her mind kept drifting to her empty stomach. She had rushed through breakfast that morning, knowing she had pre-ordered a special meal for the flight. When the drink cart started making its way down the aisle, Eleanor noticed something odd. The flight attendant, a woman with a tight blonde ponytail and a name tag reading Patricia, was skipping certain passengers. An Indian man 3 rows ahead had to raise his hand twice before being acknowledged, while Patricia chatted warmly with others. "Something to drink?" Patricia asked Eleanor, her tone noticeably cooler than it had been with the passenger in the aisle seat. "Water, please," Eleanor replied, "and could you check on my special meal?" "I ordered a low-sodium option when I booked my ticket." Patricia's smile vanished. "We don't have any special meals on this flight." Eleanor pulled out her booking confirmation. "It says right here that it was confirmed. I have some dietary restrictions from my doctor." "I already told you we don't have it," Patricia said, her voice rising slightly. "You'll have to choose from the regular options like everyone else." A white man across the aisle leaned forward. "She's just asking about a meal she ordered. Why are you getting upset?" Patricia ignored him. "If you're going to be difficult, I'll have to ask you to lower your voice. You're disturbing other passengers." Eleanor blinked in surprise. She had spoken softly, as she always did. "I'm not being difficult. I'm simply inquiring about." "Ma'am, this is your final warning about being disruptive," Patricia interrupted, loud enough that several rows of passengers turned to look. The woman in the window seat next to Eleanor spoke up. "She wasn't being disruptive at all. I've been sitting right here." A few other passengers murmured in agreement. Eleanor felt her heart racing, but kept her voice steady. "I think there's been a misunderstanding. I'm not trying to cause trouble." Patricia walked away without responding, disappearing toward the front of the plane. Eleanor sat back, taking deep breaths to calm herself. The passenger in the aisle seat, a young man with glasses, looked over sympathetically. "That was really uncalled for," he said. "Are you okay?" Before Eleanor could answer, Patricia returned with another flight attendant, a tall man with a stern expression. Behind them walked the lead flight attendant, whose name tag read Thomas. Thomas stood over Eleanor's seat. "Ma'am, I understand you've been causing a disturbance." Several passengers immediately protested. "She didn't do anything wrong." The other attendant was the one being rude. "This is ridiculous." Eleanor raised her hands slightly. "Please, there's no need for this. I simply asked about a meal I had ordered." Thomas crossed his arms. "According to my colleague, you became aggressive when told we don't have your meal." And passenger 2 rows back have started recording on his phone. Others followed suit. "This is absurd," said the woman beside Eleanor. "I witnessed the entire exchange. This passenger has been nothing but polite." Thomas ignored these comments. "I'm going to have to ask you to come with me to discuss this further." Eleanor shook her head. "I've done nothing wrong. I'll stay in my seat, and we can talk here if necessary." Thomas reached for his phone. "Security will meet us when we land, then." "This is happening because she's black, isn't it?" someone called out from behind. Thomas turned sharply. "That has nothing to do with it." 10 tense minutes passed. Eleanor sat quietly, hands folded in her lap, as passengers around her continued recording and expressing their outrage. Then the captain's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be making an unscheduled stop in Cincinnati to address a situation on board. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened." Groans echoed through the cabin. Eleanor closed her eyes briefly, her shoulders dropping just slightly, the only outward sign of her distress. When they landed, 3 security officers boarded. They walked directly to Eleanor's seat. "Ma'am, we need you to come with us," the lead officer said. Eleanor looked at him steadily. "May I ask why I'm being removed?" "The flight crew has reported that you're interfering with their duties." More passengers protested now, holding up phones, calling out that this was wrong. The young man with glasses stood up. "You can't do this. She didn't do anything." "Sir, sit down or you'll be removed too," an officer warned. Eleanor slowly gathered her belongings. "It's all right," she told those around her. "I'll go peacefully." As the officers escorted her up the aisle, phone cameras followed their every move. Eleanor walked with her head high, her dignity intact, though her hand trembled slightly on the strap of her purse. No one on that plane, not the crew, not the other passengers, and certainly not the airline, had any idea who they had just removed or what consequences would follow. Eleanor sat quietly in the small office at Cincinnati Airport, her hands folded in her lap as she waited. They had taken her carry-on bag and purse for inspection, leaving her with nothing but her thoughts. Her wrist ached where the security officer had gripped it too tightly while escorting her off the plane. The clock on the wall showed she had been waiting for nearly 2 hours. The door finally opened, and a harried-looking airport official walked in with Eleanor's belongings. "Dr. Washington, I apologize for the delay." "You're free to go," he said, not quite meeting her eyes. "May I ask what I was being detained for?" Eleanor's voice was calm, though her patience was wearing thin. The official shuffled uncomfortably. "There seems to have been a misunderstanding. The airline has arranged another flight for you tomorrow morning." Eleanor stood slowly. "A misunderstanding that resulted in my being publicly humiliated and physically removed from an aircraft I had every right to be on." "I'm just following protocol, ma'am. You can file a complaint with the airline if you wish." Outside the office, Eleanor turned on her phone to find it buzzing continuously with notifications. 27 missed calls, 63 text messages, hundreds of social media alerts. Confused, she opened the first message from her assistant, Robert. "Are you okay? You're all over the internet. Call me ASAP." Eleanor found a quiet corner of the airport and called Robert. "Thank goodness," he answered immediately. "What happened?" "There are videos everywhere." "Videos?" Eleanor asked, bewildered. "At least 6 passengers uploaded videos of you being removed from the flight. They've gone viral. #Justice for Eleanor is trending nationwide." Eleanor felt a wave of exhaustion wash over her. "I just wanted to make it to tomorrow's meeting with Midwest Airlines." "That's the thing," Robert said. "People have figured out who you are. The media is running with the story. Airline kicks off woman set to give them $800 million. The company's stock dropped 7% before closing. As Eleanor made her way to the airport hotel, she noticed people glancing at her, some with recognition in their eyes. At the reception desk, the clerk looked up and gasped. "Dr. Washington, we've been expecting you. The manager upgraded you to our presidential suite at no charge." In her room, Eleanor finally looked at the videos. In one, filmed from several rows back, she could see herself sitting calmly while the flight attendant loomed over her. Another showed her walking dignified down the aisle, escorted by security. The comments beneath were a flood of outrage. "They did this to a 72-year-old woman over a meal? This is what black people deal with every day. Wait until they find out who she is. Midwest Airlines just made the most expensive mistake in corporate history." Her phone rang again. It was Dr. Lai, the vice chair of her foundation. "Eleanor, this is outrageous. The board wants to meet tomorrow to discuss our response. We can postpone the Midwest meeting." "No," Eleanor said firmly. "Let's see how the airline handles this first." As evening fell, Midwest Airlines issued a statement. "We are aware of an incident involving a passenger on Flight 2417. We take all customer concerns seriously and are investigating the matter. The comfort of our passengers is our priority." The public response was immediate and scathing. People called the statement tone-deaf and corporate garbage. A boycott hashtag started trending. Eleanor ordered room service and watched the news in disbelief as her face appeared on national television. The anchor reported, "The passenger, identified as Dr. Eleanor Washington, is the chairperson of the Washington Foundation, which was finalizing an $800 million partnership with Midwest Airlines. Dr. Washington has not yet made any public statement." Her phone buzzed with a text from her granddaughter. "Grandma, you're my hero. They picked the wrong person to mess with." Eleanor smiled despite herself. She had never sought the spotlight, preferring to work quietly behind the scenes through her foundation. But now, thrust into this unexpected position, she recognized an opportunity to address something bigger than herself. That night, as the social media storm continued to grow, Eleanor sat at the hotel desk and began writing. She wasn't crafting a public statement or a press release. Instead, she was outlining a new vision, one that would use this painful experience to create lasting change. By morning, she had a clear plan. This wasn't just about her dignity anymore. It was about the dignity of every person who had ever been mistreated because of who they were. Morning sunlight streamed through the hotel windows as Eleanor prepared for the emergency board meeting. She chose her outfit carefully, a deep purple suit that her late husband had always said gave her an air of authority. The bruise on her wrist from yesterday's rough handling had darkened overnight, and she covered it with a gold bracelet. Her phone hadn't stopped buzzing since she woke up. News outlets were requesting interviews. Social media mentions continued to multiply. Midwest Airlines had called 6 times, each message more urgent than the last. Eleanor ignored them all. Today belonged to the Washington Foundation. At precisely 9 a.m., she connected to the video conference. 12 faces appeared on her laptop screen. Her board members joined from across the country on short notice. These were people she had carefully selected over the years: former surgeons, business leaders, civil rights attorneys, and community organizers. People who understood both power and justice. "Thank you all for making yourselves available," Eleanor began. "I assume you've seen the videos." Dr. Lai, who had been her colleague in neurosurgery for 20 years, leaned toward his camera. "Eleanor, what they did to you was inexcusable. How are you holding up?" "I'm fine, David," she said with a small smile. "But this isn't about me, it's about what happens next." For the next 30 minutes, Eleanor described her experience in precise detail, the same way she used to dictate surgical notes, factual, thorough, and without emotional embellishment. The board members listened in stunned silence. The $800 million grant to Midwest Airlines was meant to transform their company culture, she concluded. Yesterday showed us exactly why that transformation is needed. But it also showed us something else, that Midwest isn't ready to receive our help. Mrs. Chen, a retired federal judge, nodded. "I agree. We can't reward behavior like this with our funding." "But isn't that exactly why they need our program?" asked Mr. Jackson, their youngest board member. "To prevent incidents like this?" Eleanor removed her reading glasses. "I've been thinking about that all night, Richard. But change has to start with acknowledgement. Their public statement didn't acknowledge what happened, let alone why it happened." The discussion continued for another hour. Some board members worried about the practical consequences of withdrawing such a massive grant at the last minute. Others suggested alternatives, reducing the amount, adding stricter conditions, or delaying the partnership. Eleanor listened to each perspective carefully. Finally, she said, "I'd like to propose a vote on the following: that we formally withdraw from negotiations with Midwest Airlines and issue a public statement explaining our decision." The vote was unanimous. Eleanor had prepared a draft statement which appeared on everyone's screens. They refined it together, carefully choosing each word. It needed to be clear without being vindictive, principled without being self-righteous. The Washington Foundation cannot in good conscience partner with an organization whose actions so dramatically contradict our core values of dignity, respect, and equality. By noon, the statement was released to the press and posted on the Foundation's website. Within minutes, it was being quoted by major news outlets across the country. Eleanor's assistant called immediately after. "Dr. Washington, Midwest's CEO, is trying to reach you personally. He says it's urgent." "I'm sure it is," Eleanor replied. "Tell him I'll speak with him tomorrow. Today, I need time to think." After hanging up, Eleanor walked to the window of her hotel room. 3 floors below, a news van had parked outside. Another was pulling in behind it. She watched a flock of birds soar past, free and untroubled by the human drama unfolding below them. The easy thing would have been to accept Midwest's inevitable apology, take their promises of change, and proceed with the partnership. It would have meant less conflict, less attention. But Eleanor hadn't built her foundation to take the easy path. She'd built it to make a difference. Her phone rang again, Midwest's CEO calling from yet another number. Eleanor silenced it and sat down at the desk. She began drafting plans for something new, a comprehensive initiative that would address discriminatory practices across the entire transportation industry. If one airline wouldn't lead the way, perhaps an entire sector could be transformed instead. The $800 million that had been earmarked for Midwest now represented not just funding, but leverage, a powerful statement about what kind of behavior would and would not be tolerated in American business. As evening approached, Eleanor finally turned on the television. Midwest Airlines stock had fallen another 12% since her foundation's announcement. The CEO had scheduled an emergency press conference for the following morning. Eleanor turned off the TV, picked up her pen, and continued writing her new vision. The real work was just beginning. Eleanor sat in the corner booth of a quiet Chicago cafe, sipping chamomile tea as she waited. The last 5 days had been a whirlwind. Her story had dominated news cycles, prompted heated debates on morning talk shows, and even inspired an overnight change to one airline's customer service policy. Her phone buzzed constantly with messages of support and media requests. Through it all, Eleanor had remained largely silent, letting her foundation's statement speak for itself. But today, she had agreed to meet with someone, Gregory Wilson, the CEO of Midwest Airlines. He'd called her 17 times in the past 3 days. The door chimed, and Eleanor looked up to see a tall, broad-shouldered man scanning the cafe. The confidence Wilson normally displayed in television appearances and shareholder meetings was noticeably absent. His shoulders were tense, his expression strained. When he spotted Eleanor, relief washed over his face. "Dr. Washington," he said, reaching her table and extending his hand. "Thank you for agreeing to meet me." Eleanor motioned for him to sit. "Mr. Wilson." A waitress appeared, and Wilson ordered coffee. His hand trembled slightly as he set down the menu. "Dr. Washington, I want to personally apologize for the inexcusable way you were treated on our flight." "There is no excuse for what happened." Eleanor studied him. "You mentioned that in your press conference yesterday, along with announcing the firing of 3 employees. Is that why you wanted to meet? To deliver an apology in person?" Wilson cleared his throat. "Partly. But also to discuss how we might salvage our partnership. The training initiative your foundation designed is exactly what we need, now more than ever." "I see," Eleanor said, taking another sip of tea. "So you still want the money?" Wilson flinched. "It's not just about the funding. Your foundation's expertise in diversity training and community engagement is unmatched. We're prepared to accept all your original conditions, plus additional oversight measures." The waitress returned with Wilson's coffee, and he thanked her automatically, his eyes never leaving Eleanor's face. "Mr. Wilson, do you know why I was on that flight to Chicago?" He nodded. "To finalize our partnership agreement." "Yes, but do you know why I was flying economy class? Why I didn't use your executive lounge? Why none of your staff recognized me despite months of negotiations between our organizations?" Wilson hesitated. I'm not sure." "Because I wanted to experience your airline exactly as regular passengers do. Not as a VIP, not as someone with special treatment, just as an ordinary person." Eleanor set down her teacup. "What I experienced was illuminating, wouldn't you say?" Wilson's face flushed. "Dr. Washington, we've taken immediate steps. Beyond the terminations, we've launched a full review of our training procedures. We've hired an outside firm to audit our customer service practices." Eleanor nodded. "These are good first steps, but they address symptoms, not causes." "What do you mean?" "Your flight attendant didn't wake up that morning planning to discriminate. Your security team didn't start their shift intending to manhandle a 72-year-old woman. Yet it happened." Eleanor leaned forward. "The question is, what environment made them feel their actions were appropriate? What culture allowed them to see an elderly black woman as threatening rather than as a passenger deserving respect?" Wilson was quiet for a long moment. "I don't have a good answer for that." "That's the first honest thing you've said since you sat down," Eleanor replied. For the next hour, they talked. Eleanor described the small indignities she had noticed even before the incident, the different greetings, the selective help with luggage, the dismissive tones. Wilson listened, really listened, occasionally taking notes. "Our partnership agreement included a one-time training program," Eleanor said eventually. "But what you need is a complete cultural overhaul. That requires sustained effort, not a quick fix." "Whatever it takes," Wilson said. "Please, Dr. Washington, tell me what we need to do to make this right." Eleanor opened her purse and removed a folder. "My foundation has drafted a revised proposal. It includes quarterly audits by independent evaluators, a passenger advisory board with real decision-making power, and mandatory training for every employee, from baggage handlers to board members." Wilson took the folder. And the funding. We'll need to see measurable progress before committing resources at the level we originally discussed. Eleanor's tone was firm. Trust, once broken, must be re-earned. As Wilson flipped through the documents, his expression grew more serious. These conditions are extensive. They reflect the extensive nature of the problem, Mr. Wilson. Eleanor stood, signaling the end of their meeting. You have 48 hours to consider our terms. The choice is yours, meaningful change or more damage control. Wilson rose quickly. I appreciate your directness, Dr. Washington. And again, I am truly sorry for what happened. Eleanor nodded. Apologies matter, Mr. Wilson, but actions matter more. As she watched him leave, Eleanor felt neither triumph nor anger. This wasn't about punishment or revenge. It was about transformation, turning an ugly incident into an opportunity for genuine improvement. Outside the cafe, reporters had gathered, somehow learning of the meeting. Eleanor slipped out the back entrance, not yet ready to make a public statement. First, she wanted to see if Midwest Airlines would rise to the challenge or continue with business as usual. The answer would determine not just the fate of her foundation's funding, but potentially the way an entire industry treated its most vulnerable customers. 3 months after the incident, Eleanor stood at a podium in the grand ballroom of the Harrington Hotel. Behind her hung a banner that read Dignity in Transit Project. Before her sat representatives from 27 airlines, 15 rail companies, and 9 major bus services. Cameras flashed as she adjusted the microphone. Transportation isn't just about moving from one place to another, Eleanor began. It's about how we treat each other along the way. The crowd quieted, leaned forward to catch every word. Eleanor had become something of a folk hero in recent months, the grandmother who stood up to corporate America and won. But she hadn't spent that time basking in attention. Instead, she'd been working tirelessly, redirecting the $800 million originally intended for Midwest Airlines into a broader initiative. Today, I'm pleased to announce the first 7 partnerships under the Dignity in Transit project, she continued. These companies have committed to comprehensive anti-bias training, independent oversight, and transparent reporting of customer complaints. In return, the Washington Foundation will provide both funding and expertise to ensure their success. Notably absent from the list was Midwest Airlines. Their stock had continued to tumble in the weeks following Eleanor's incident. Their CEO, Wilson, had resigned after the board rejected Eleanor's conditions, claiming they were too onerous. His replacement, a former hotel executive with a reputation for customer service excellence, had reached out to Eleanor just last week, but it was too late. The foundation had moved on. After the formal presentation, Eleanor mingled with transportation executives eager to join the project's second phase. Her assistant, Robert, appeared at her elbow. Dr. Lai needs a word, he whispered. Something about Midwest. Eleanor excused herself and found Dr. Lai near the refreshment table, his expression troubled. What is it, David? She asked. Midwest just announced another round of layoffs, he said quietly. 500 employees, mostly from minority communities. They're claiming financial hardship. Eleanor frowned. This wasn't what she'd wanted. They're blaming us. Not explicitly, but the implication is clear. The press is starting to run with it. He showed her a news alert on his phone. Fallout continues. Minority workers pay price for Midwest's PR disaster. Eleanor felt a weight settle on her shoulders. She had withdrawn funding to prompt change, not to hurt innocent employees caught in corporate crossfire. Get me everything you can on those layoffs, she told Dr. Lai, and schedule a meeting with their new CEO for tomorrow. Back in her hotel suite that evening, Eleanor pored over reports from her team. The layoffs were concentrated in cities with predominantly Black and Hispanic populations. Long-serving employees were being cut while newer hires in other locations remained. The pattern was troubling. Eleanor's granddaughter called while she was reviewing the data. Grandma, I saw you on TV today. You were amazing. Eleanor smiled despite her worries. Thank you, sweetheart. How's school? Good. I did my current events report on you. My teacher said you're showing us how to use power responsibly. After they hung up, Eleanor sat with that thought. Power responsibly. Yes, she had wielded her foundation's financial power to make a point. But true responsibility meant addressing unintended consequences too. The next morning, Eleanor met with Midwest's new CEO, Diane Powell, in a private dining room at the hotel. Powell was younger than Eleanor had expected, with keen eyes and a direct manner. "Dr. Washington, thank you for seeing me," Powell began. "I want to be clear that I don't defend what happened to you. It was inexcusable." Eleanor nodded. "I appreciate that. Now tell me about these layoffs." Powell sighed. "The company was already struggling before your incident. We'd overexpanded, taken on too much debt. The stock price drop after your experience just accelerated things. Yet you've chosen to cut jobs primarily in certain communities," Eleanor observed. "Those locations were underperforming before all this," Powell countered. "But I'll admit the decisions were made hastily. I've only been in this role for 3 weeks." Eleanor studied the woman across from her. Powell seemed genuine, if overwhelmed. "What's your vision for Midwest, Ms. Powell? Beyond survival?" For the next hour, they talked frankly about the airline's challenges and opportunities. Powell had ideas, good ones, but lacked the resources to implement them. By the time coffee arrived, Eleanor had made up her mind. "I'd like to make you a proposal," she said. "Not the same as our original agreement, something new." Powell leaned forward. "I'm listening." "The Dignity in Transit project needs a case study, a company willing to undergo complete transformation from struggle to success." Eleanor outlined her idea: a smaller grant with specific conditions, including rehiring the laid-off workers and making them central to the airline's renewal. As Powell considered the offer, Eleanor felt a sense of completion. This wasn't about punishment anymore. It wasn't even about the money. It was about creating a model for meaningful change, one that could inspire an entire industry. 18 months after being pulled off that flight, Eleanor Washington stood in the lobby of Midwest Airlines headquarters. The building was the same, but almost everything else had changed. New faces greeted her warmly at the reception desk. The walls that once displayed generic travel posters now showcased photographs of real employees with customer testimonials. Most noticeably, a large plaque near the entrance read, "Dignity First. Our commitment to every passenger, every journey." Eleanor checked her watch. She was early as usual. Today's press conference wouldn't start for another 20 minutes. Behind her, camera crews were setting up in the large conference room, arranging their equipment for the big announcement. "Dr. Washington." Eleanor turned to see a young woman approaching. She recognized her immediately. The flight attendant who had been in training when Eleanor had her unfortunate experience. The woman had reached out months later, sharing her perspective on the airline's culture and becoming an unexpected ally in its transformation. "Rita," Eleanor smiled warmly. "How are you?" "Nervous," Rita admitted. "I've never spoken at a press conference before." "You'll do wonderfully," Eleanor assured her. "Just speak from the heart about what you've seen change." As they chatted, Diane Powell emerged from the elevator. In 18 months as CEO, Powell had overseen a remarkable turnaround. She'd replaced nearly the entire executive team, bringing in leaders specifically committed to equitable practices. With Eleanor's foundation providing expertise and initial funding, they had implemented the industry's most comprehensive anti-bias training program. "Everything's ready," Powell said, joining them. "Shall we go over our speaking points one more time?" The 3 women found a quiet corner to review their presentations. Eleanor would announce the foundation's new investment, Powell would outline the company's transformation, and Rita would share perspectives from employees. At precisely 10 a.m., they walked together into the packed conference room. Cameras flashed as they took their places at the table. TV crews adjusted their equipment, and reporters readied their questions. The story of Eleanor and Midwest Airlines had captivated the public imagination for over a year. A rare business news story with heart, conflict, and now, perhaps, redemption. Powell welcomed everyone and introduced Eleanor, who approached the podium with measured steps. Age had not diminished her presence. If anything, the past year and a half had only added to her natural dignity. 18 months ago, I had an experience on a Midwest Airlines flight that many would describe as humiliating, Eleanor began. Today, I stand before you not to dwell on past wrongs, but to celebrate remarkable progress. She described the comprehensive changes Midwest had implemented. the creation of an independent passenger review board with real authority, the revised hiring practices that had increased diversity at all levels, the industry-leading training program that focused not just on procedures but on underlying biases. The Washington Foundation is proud to announce a new $50 million grant to support Midwest's continued transformation, Eleanor concluded, with additional funding contingent on measurable progress. This is significantly less than our original proposal, but reflects a more sustainable, genuine approach to change. Powell spoke next, detailing specific improvements in customer satisfaction scores and employee retention. She didn't shy away from acknowledging past failures or the difficult choices made during the company's restructuring. Then Rita took the microphone, sharing stories from the front lines, how employees now felt empowered to speak up when they witnessed problematic behavior, how customer complaints about discriminatory treatment had plummeted, how pride had returned to their work. During the question and answer session, a reporter asked Eleanor the question everyone wanted answered, "Dr. Washington, have you flown Midwest since the incident?" Eleanor smiled. 3 times, in fact. Once in business class, once in economy, and once without anyone knowing I would be on board. Each time, I had observed a different airline than the one I encountered 18 months ago. After the formal press conference ended, employees gathered in the lobby for a more private celebration. Someone had brought a cake decorated with the airline's new slogan. As Eleanor cut the first slice, spontaneous applause broke out. Later, alone with Powell in her office, Eleanor reflected on their journey. "When I pulled our funding that day, I never imagined we'd end up here," she admitted. Powell nodded. Fear of financial loss caught our attention, but it was the vision of something better that inspired real change. Eleanor glanced at the framed photograph on Powell's desk, the airline's new leadership team, remarkably diverse in age, gender, and background. True change, Eleanor said softly, comes not from fear of loss, but from a genuine commitment to seeing the humanity in every person who walks through your doors. As she left the building that afternoon, Eleanor Washington felt a rare sense of completion. The incident that had begun with humiliation had transformed not just one company, but had sparked a movement across an entire industry. The $800 million she had initially withdrawn had ultimately created far more value than it ever could have as a simple grant. Sometimes, Eleanor reflected as her driver pulled away from the curb, the most powerful action isn't what you give, it's what you withhold until real change becomes possible.